The more you love them, the more they pull away. The more you care, the lonelier you feel. If you've ever been in a relationship with someone who has an avoidant attachment style, you know this feeling well. You're not wrong, they're not wrong, and yet the connection slowly fades into distance, silence, and eventually, pain. Here's the hard truth. Sometimes they do love you, but they don't even realize it until you've walked away. That's why today I want to break down something crucial. Emotional detachment isn't indifference. It's how you become more attractive to an avoidant partner. When you learn how to detach the right way, you don't just protect your own self-worth, you create space for the other person to truly feel. As someone who studied avoidant dynamics and lived it firsthand, I understand this deeply. Avoidants don't respond to love the way you expect. They don't need more pressure. They need space to recognize their own emotions. And the paradox is, only when you stop chasing do they start approaching. This video isn't about manipulating avoidance. The real goal is deeper, to help you become more secure, more grounded, someone who no longer loses themselves in the hope of being chosen. So if you've ever felt confused, anxious, or stuck in this cycle, this space is for you. Hit subscribe and watch until the end, because I'm going to show you how to protect your worth, build emotional boundaries, and stop getting caught in the emotional push-pull. There's something very specific that happens when you fall for someone with an avoidant attachment style. Their emotional instability begins to trigger yours. A delayed reply, a cold glance, a quiet day, and suddenly your mind spirals with questions. Did I do something wrong? Are they mad? Am I still important to them? Your emotional state becomes dictated not by facts, but by their unpredictable reactions. This is what psychology calls emotional fusion, where your sense of self blurs with the emotional waves of the person you're attached to. You stop knowing where you end and they begin. You become like a mirror, absorbing, reflecting, and constantly adjusting to match their mood, but in the process, you lose your center. And the painful truth is, in this state, you're no longer showing up as your true self. You become a version of yourself designed to manage their emotions, rather than someone genuinely connected to your own. With avoidant partners, this becomes even more complex. Avoidants don't lack emotions, they simply have a hard time accessing them, and often withdraw when intimacy feels too overwhelming. But for someone anxiously attached, this withdrawal is like setting off a fire alarm. You panic, overfunction, overreach. You chase, and the more you reach out, the more they retreat. And so begins the cycle. You try to get closer, they pull away, and you're left even more anxious and exhausted. The key here is not to fix or chase, but to come back to your own emotional ground. Learn to pause. Learn to observe without reacting immediately. That's where emotional independence begins. Love should not mean handing someone the remote control to your nervous system. Love should mean being able to stand beside another person and still stand as yourself. In the original video, the therapist shares a seemingly small but powerful story. One day, she and her partner misread each other's emotional states, and it led to disconnection. She thought he was stressed, so she gave him space. He thought she was upset, so he spent the whole day feeling anxious. Neither of them checked in, they just assumed. And by the time they sat down together, both were tense, not because anything truly bad happened, but because of false interpretations and emotional merging. And this happens more often than we realize. When we stop checking in with reality and start reacting from projection, we're no longer relating to the person in front of us. We're relating to the story in our heads. And connection dies there. So how do you begin shifting toward emotional independence? First, start by naming your feelings before you act on them. When you're triggered, don't text, don't test, don't withdraw. Pause. Ask yourself, am I feeling this because of something real or because of how I'm interpreting their mood? Just one moment of awareness creates the distance you need to come back to yourself. Second, allow them to have their own moods without making it mean anything about your worth. They can be tired, distracted, even distant, and that does not mean you're being rejected. Securely attached people know a partner is allowed to have their own internal world, and it doesn't have to threaten the relationship. And third, only communicate once you've calmed down. Avoidants are often overwhelmed by demands and unspoken expectations, but they can listen if you speak with clarity and emotional balance rather than fear and pressure. Remember, emotional independence is not coldness. It's a higher form of love. When you no longer swing up and down in reaction to their silence, you become a grounding presence. And avoidants, no matter how distant they seem, are deeply drawn to people who feel emotionally safe and self-regulated. But the most important part of all this is, you don't do it to win them. You do it to win yourself back. When you're no longer living in emotional fusion, you become someone who can clearly see whether this relationship is truly worth staying in. You no longer ask, what do I need to do to keep them? Instead, you ask, do I still want this now that I'm standing in my full self? That shift is everything. One of the biggest reasons relationships with avoidant partners become overwhelming isn't just because they pull away, but because we bring our entire storm of unprocessed emotions directly into the relationship, expecting our partner to be the container for our chaos. And in doing so, we don't just overwhelm them, we lose connection with our own emotional maturity. Avoidant partners often struggle with intense emotional expression. They don't know what to do when someone bursts into tears, accuses, demands, or expresses a wave of messy emotions they themselves can't even make sense of. To them, that's not intimacy, that's pressure. And under pressure, avoidants shut down, pull back, or disappear. In long-term relationships especially, there is one essential emotional skill that protects connection: the ability to self-regulate before bringing your emotions into the relationship. This means learning to ask yourself, what am I actually feeling right now? Am I overreacting? Is this an old fear showing up, or a real issue that needs to be discussed? We often believe emotions should be immediately shared or expressed, but someone who is emotionally mature knows not every feeling needs to be dumped onto your partner. Some emotions need to be sat with, breathed through, soothed, so you can understand yourself before asking anyone else to understand you. When you pause and regulate yourself first, you give yourself space to respond from groundedness, not from reactivity. And the beauty is, when you enter a conversation from a calm, centered place, the avoidant partner becomes much more receptive to what you're saying, because they don't feel attacked. They don't feel like they're being asked to fix your emotional state. They sense that you're inviting them into the truth, not making them responsible for pain you haven't yet processed. This is especially important in seemingly small moments. Let's say your partner is a little distant one day. Instead of instantly asking, "What's wrong with you? Why are you acting cold?" you can sit with yourself and ask, "Is this actually a red flag, or am I being triggered by an old fear?" Maybe you're just tired. Maybe you're more sensitive today. Maybe you're carrying an old wound where silence meant abandonment. And if that's true, what you really need in that moment is not their reassurance, but your own presence with your fear. Self-regulation doesn't mean repression, nor does it mean avoidance. It means being honest with yourself before demanding honesty from someone else. It's an act of kindness to your inner world and a form of respect for your partner's emotional space. Remember, not every feeling you have needs to be handled by them. A healthy relationship is not a dumping ground for your emotional volatility. It's a space where both people learn to hold themselves first before coming together with clarity. When you practice this consistently, you'll find yourself calmer, less anxious, and most importantly, you'll no longer feel the urge to unload everything immediately. You'll filter. You'll ask, is this truly important? Can I soothe myself first? And if I do choose to share, what's the most connecting way to express this, not just to vent, but to build understanding? These questions shift you from reaction to intention, from chaos to conscious connection. And this kind of emotional intentionality is what makes you more attractive to an avoidant partner, not because you manage emotions well, but because you don't make them responsible for carrying your emotional world. Avoidants don't need perfect partners, but they deeply value someone who is clear, self-aware, and who doesn't use them as a place to hide from their own feelings. And you deserve to become that kind of person, not to win someone, but to protect your peace and reclaim your emotional freedom. In any relationship where one or both partners have an insecure attachment style, whether anxious or avoidant, there's usually some form of unconscious need for control. Control doesn't always look like overt commands or strict rules. Sometimes it hides quietly in silence, waiting for the other person to just know. Sometimes it shows up as unspoken expectations. You don't say what you need, but you secretly hope your partner will sense it, anticipate it, and act exactly as you imagined. That is still control, only dressed up as hope. For anxiously attached people, control often stems from a fear of being abandoned. They worry that if they don't influence the situation or subtly guide their partner's behavior, they'll be forgotten or left behind. For avoidance, control looks different. It's about protecting space, pace, and emotions, because their inner world is already overloaded. But regardless of the form it takes, control always suffocates emotional connection. One of the most common forms of subtle control in relationships is vague communication paired with hidden expectations. You want them to call you every night, but you don't say it. You want them to check in when you go silent, but you never tell them what you need. You think, if they really cared, they'd know. If I matter, they'll just do it. But the truth is, they're not mind readers. They have their own attachment patterns and emotional blind spots. When you don't express your needs but still expect your partner to meet them, you're creating a silent test, one they don't even know they're taking. And when they fail, you feel hurt, rejected, and disappointed. But this cycle doesn't bring you closer. It makes the relationship feel like an emotional minefield, full of guessing, waiting, and inevitable letdowns. The solution isn't to become colder or pretend you need nothing. The real healing begins when you speak your needs clearly, and then release the outcome. If you want to talk every night, say, "It helps me feel connected when we talk before bed. Could we make that a habit?" And if they agree but forget sometimes, don't take it as a personal betrayal. Learn to respond with flexibility, not with blame or silent withdrawal. Letting go of control also means letting go of the fantasy of perfection. You can't force someone to love you in the exact way you imagine, at the exact pace, intensity, or timing you crave. Instead, observe how they naturally express love. And if their version isn't enough for you, you're allowed to say so. But you're not entitled to change who they are to soothe your anxiety. Healthy relationships don't run on emotional guessing games or secret tests. They're built on honest communication, realistic expectations, and the courage to allow the other person to be fully themselves. When you stop controlling, you create space for them to show up authentically, and space for yourself to breathe. Letting go of control doesn't mean giving up your right to be loved. In fact, it's the moment you begin to love without possession, to connect without suffocating. You show up with truth, and you're also willing to step back if your needs aren't met, without manipulating or reshaping your partner into someone they're not. That is the love of an emotionally secure adult. One of the most invisible yet dangerous traps we often fall into when loving someone, especially someone avoidant, is that we hand over our self-worth to their reactions. We love them, but we also secretly measure our own value by how they love us back. If they text sweetly, we feel worthy. If they go cold, we start to doubt. Am I not enough? Did I do something wrong? Why don't they need me like I need them? Slowly, the relationship becomes less about love and more like a mirror judging whether we are lovable at all. This is where you must learn to let go of your dependence on the outcome they provide. Because the moment your sense of worth hangs on someone else's behavior, especially someone avoidant, who naturally pulls back, responds slowly, or struggles to show affection, you are setting yourself up for a constant cycle of confusion and self-doubt. You begin living in a half-waiting, half-fearing state, where every little action from them can make or break your emotional state. That isn't love, it's emotional dependency. This often shows up in how we attach our worth to proof of love. You need them to perform certain gestures or hit certain milestones so you can feel safe. If they introduce me to their family, then I matter. If they post me online, then it's real. If they change for me, then I'm worth it. But love is not an equation of conditions, and you do not need to be proven worthy to deserve care, respect, or love. The truth is, you've always had worth even when no one sees it. You are lovable, even if someone struggles to love you back. A healthy relationship is built between two people who want to connect, not one person proving their value while hoping to be chosen. And to do that, you have to start rebuilding your internal value system, one that stands independent of your partner's behavior. Begin by asking yourself, if I didn't have this relationship, who would I be? What makes me valuable outside of being loved? Am I being true to myself, or trying to become someone they'll want? These questions may be uncomfortable, but they are the beginning of freedom. When your self-worth stops fluctuating with their approval, you will feel lighter, more grounded, and less reactive to their daily moods. And beautifully, when you're no longer dependent, you become more attractive. Not because you're pretending not to care, but because you're genuinely okay whether they choose you or not. You no longer twist yourself to fit their mold or overextend to be enough. You are fully you, and if they can't see it, you're able to walk away without feeling like a failure. Letting go of outcome dependence doesn't mean apathy. It means mature care, loving someone not because they complete you, but because you're choosing to connect, not to survive. You give them the freedom to choose, and you hold on to your own freedom too. Remember, avoidance might make you feel like you're not enough, not because you aren't, but because they lack the tools to connect the way you need. And sometimes, the greatest act of love isn't learning how to keep someone. It's learning how to keep your dignity, your worth, and your peace, even while loving them deeply. One of the most common patterns among anxiously attached individuals is that they focus more on the future of the relationship than on the present moment. From the very beginning of a connection, instead of savoring the experience of being together, their mind is already asking, "Where is this going? Are they the one? When will they commit? Am I wasting my time?" And when you're in love with someone avoidant, someone who rarely talks about the future and tends to move slowly or carefully around commitment, this anxiety often intensifies. Now, wanting clarity about the future is not wrong. It's human. We all want to know if we're headed in a meaningful direction. But when you use the idea of a future commitment to compensate for a lack of safety in the present, you're no longer truly connected to the person in front of you. You're not loving them as they are. You're in love with a future version of them that doesn't exist yet. And in doing so, you miss the one place where real connection can be built: the now. Avoidant partners who already fear being engulfed by expectations often feel even more pressure when you constantly bring up the future before there's enough trust or safety for them to open up. They don't shut down because they don't care. They retreat because they feel rushed into a version of love they haven't caught up to yet. The harder you try to pull them into the future, the more likely they are to either cling to the present or worse, leave in order to reclaim their sense of control. That's why learning to truly stay present in your relationship is a foundational emotional skill, not just for loving an avoidant partner, but for loving in a grounded, emotionally mature way. When you can appreciate each conversation, each meeting, each small gesture, without turning it into a checklist for future security, you offer your partner a kind of safety that's rare. I'm here with you, not because I need a promise, but because this moment with you has meaning on its own. Ask yourself, am I living in what's real or in what might be? Because when every interaction becomes a silent audition for commitment, your presence becomes conditional. You're no longer connecting, you're evaluating, measuring, watching for signs. You're using the present as a test rather than a space for intimacy to grow. Ironically, avoidant partners can actually open up when they feel they're not being pressured by the weight of the future. They need time. They need to feel safe enough to explore emotions at their own pace. When you stop forcing a timeline and start offering presence, they may feel free enough to meet you where you are, not because you demanded it, but because you created the space for it. Being present doesn't mean abandoning all expectations. It simply means acknowledging the value of now, and not needing to attach every moment to a long-term goal in order for it to matter. When you're present, you're no longer asking, "Will this last forever?" Instead, you're asking the much more powerful question, are we truly connected right now? Letting go of future obsession isn't about giving up. It's about being strong enough to let the future unfold naturally, instead of trying to control it. You're not loving to secure an outcome, you're loving to experience the relationship fully, honestly, moment by moment. And if, in the end, the relationship doesn't last, you will know this: you didn't abandon yourself in the process. You showed up, you were present. You loved from a place of truth, not fear. One of the most subtle yet powerful emotional skills in any relationship, especially when you're with someone avoidant, is the ability to observe their emotions without absorbing them. This sounds simple in theory, but in practice, it's incredibly difficult, especially if you're someone highly sensitive, someone who naturally picks up on shifts in tone, energy, or facial expressions. When your partner is distant, you feel disconnected. When they're in a bad mood, your heart sinks. When they're quiet, you start spiraling, imagining worst-case scenarios. And before you know it, your emotional state is no longer yours, it's completely entangled with theirs. For anxiously attached individuals, this goes even deeper. Not only do you absorb their emotions, but you also feel responsible for fixing them. You believe it's your job to cheer them up, bring them closer, make things better. But for someone avoidant who often shuts down or withdraws when overwhelmed, this kind of emotional pursuit can feel invasive, even suffocating. Instead of pulling them closer, it pushes them further away. That's why it's essential to learn how to observe your partner's emotional state as information, not as a personal call to action. When they're quiet, instead of jumping to conclusions like, "Are they mad at me?" or "What did I do wrong?" try stepping back and simply acknowledging, "They're having their own emotional experience right now, and I don't need to fix it or take it on as mine." This is emotional maturity, honoring the inner world of the other person while protecting the boundaries of your own. In the original video, the therapist shares a relatable story. Her partner believed she was upset all day when in fact she wasn't. His misreading of her emotional state led to unnecessary tension. The problem wasn't his concern, it was that he absorbed an emotion that wasn't actually there, reacted to it, and created a story around it. This is a classic example of blurred emotional boundaries, when we respond not to what is, but to what we think the other person feels. We often end up disconnected from reality and from each other. So how do you observe without absorbing? First, by practicing emotional awareness. Can you tell what you're feeling versus what they're feeling? If you were in a good mood but started feeling off after noticing their silence, it's likely you've absorbed something that wasn't yours. Remember, just because they're quiet or moody doesn't mean you need to change. They might be tired, stressed, or going through something personal, and you don't need to join them in that emotional state out of guilt or over-responsibility. Next, ask yourself, does this situation require me to act or simply to respect? Not every emotional shift from your partner needs your intervention. Sometimes, support means being present without fixing. It means being the calm beside their storm, not rushing in to stop the rain. This kind of presence is deeply grounding for someone avoidant because it shows them they can have emotions without fearing pressure or emotional overload from you. And finally, remind yourself often, you are allowed to keep your peace, even when someone else is not okay. Just because they're having a hard time doesn't mean you need to go down with them. You can stay centered, grounded, and emotionally stable while also holding space for their experience. That's not cold, that's love with boundaries. When you practice this observe, don't absorb mindset regularly, you stop being pulled into their every mood swing. You become an emotional anchor not because you carry their weight, but because you hold your own energy steady while they move through theirs. And this emotional steadiness is the foundation of a truly healthy relationship. Two people, each responsible for their own inner world, walking side by side without losing themselves in the other. Loving someone with an avoidant attachment style is not a journey for the hurried heart. It demands more strength than your wounds, more patience than your longing, and more depth than your desire to be loved. Because with avoidance, love isn't built through promises, it's built through conscious presence, emotional boundaries, and unwavering self-connection. We often enter relationships hoping someone else will fill the empty spaces inside us. But the truth is, if you don't know how to hold yourself, the deeper you love, the more you lose yourself. Love, when it costs you your identity, is not love, it's emotional dependency disguised as connection. These 6 strategies aren't tricks to make someone stay. They're not manipulations to change an avoidant partner. They are pathways back to your emotional center, the place inside you that knows you can love deeply without abandoning yourself, that you can connect wholeheartedly without losing your ground, that you can show up, listen, empathize, walk beside someone, not dissolve into them. Let's recap. When you shift from emotional fusion to emotional independence, you stop letting their moods dictate yours. When you self-regulate, you stop exploding from anxiety, you speak from calm clarity. When you let go of control, you express your needs without trying to manage theirs. When you detach from outcomes, your worth is no longer tied to how much they love you back. When you stay present, you stop chasing the future and start living the moment. And when you observe, not absorb, you stop living through their emotions and start protecting your own peace. Healing doesn't come from changing someone else. It comes from changing how you relate to yourself, from not chasing connection through chaos, from no longer shrinking just to be chosen. You begin to love from a place of wholeness, not from lack. And then, naturally, you'll see. If the avoidant is willing to grow, they will come closer. And if they cannot, you will be strong enough to walk away, without bitterness, without begging, and most importantly, without losing yourself. Love is inviting someone into your life, not to complete you, but to walk beside you. And you deserve a love like that. But first, become that kind of love for yourself.